Some stories stay with you because they remind you of something you once believed and maybe forgot along the way. This is a tale about a young woman who left everything behind for a promise written on paper, and a man the whole town had already judged. They laughed at her. You know, called her foolish, said she'd married the poorest cowboy in Copper Creek. But here's the thing about folks who judge too quick they miss what's hiding in plain sight. I reckon you'll see what I mean soon enough. This one's for anyone who ever took a chance when the odds looked thin. The train whistle cut through the afternoon like a blade, and Clara Whitmore's fingers went white around the handle of her carpet bag. She stepped onto the platform at Copper Creek. Montana territory, 3 weeks of coal smoke and sleepless nights clinging to her dress. Her hand moved to her collar, an old habit, but the brooch was gone. Pawned on Chestnut Street for $12, enough for a ticket west, and nothing more. A figure moved toward her from the shade of the depot wall. Faded work shirt, sweat-stained hat pulled low, boots cracked along the soles, mended twice, maybe 3 times. He carried a hand-lettered sign, her name scratched in crooked letters on brown butcher paper. Clara's breath caught. This was not the man in the photograph. He stopped 3 feet away, said nothing. His eyes moved over her face the way a man reads a bill of sale quick, assessing, already deciding what he'd bought. Behind her, the conductor called out. The train groaned and began to pull away. She did not turn around. If you're listening from somewhere quiet tonight, a porch, a kitchen, a room where the lamp burns low, I'd be glad to know where this story is finding you. My grandmother used to say a tale shared is a bridge built. Drop a word below and let me know where you're watching from. The wagon seat had no cushion. Clara felt every rut, every stone, every uneven patch of the road through her spine. Dust rose in thin clouds around the wheels and settled on her sleeves, her collar, the hem of her traveling dress. Caleb Stone did not speak. She counted the fence posts as they passed. 7, 12, 23. The sun dropped lower, stretching shadows across the dry grass. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding the last copper light. The cabin appeared beyond a stand of cottonwoods, small, weathered boards gone silver with age, a stone chimney, a porch with 1 step missing. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop, climbed down, reached for her trunk without a word. Clara followed him inside. 2 rooms. The main room held a cook stove cold, a table with 2 chairs, a fireplace blackened with years of use, 1 chair worn smooth at the armrests, the other barely touched. Yours? Caleb nodded toward the bedroom door. He set her trunk inside, then pulled a bedroll from beneath the table. I'll be in the barn. The door closed behind him. Clara stood alone in the silence. She touched the table. Solid pine, hand planed. The cook stove was an Enterprise model. Cast iron, heavy as a promise. Someone had kept it clean. No rust on the surface. No grease crusted around the burners. The bedroom held a narrow bed. A quilt folded at the foot, hand-stitched. Faded blue and cream. A small window faced east. The curtain had a tear at the corner, mended once with thread that didn't quite match. A heavy trunk sat beneath the bed, locked and untouched, dust thick on its brass fittings. She knelt beside the bed. The floorboard beneath the window sat slightly higher than the others. Her fingers found the edge, lifted. A velvet case, inside a daguerreotype. A woman in silk. Dark hair swept back, eyes steady and serious. A boy at her knee, maybe 8, maybe 10, with the same set to his jaw. the same careful stillness in his posture. Clara tilted the photograph toward the fading light from the window. The woman's eyes, she had seen them before, an hour ago, on the man who had barely spoken 12 words to her since she'd stepped off the train. Clara slid the floorboard head back into place. Her hands were trembling. On the flyleaf of the Bible beside the bed, written in faded ink, Margaret Stone, 1832 to 1862. 30 years old when she died. Caleb would have been 10. Clara looked at the second chair, the one no one ever sat in, and the questions settled into her chest like a stone. What happened in this house? 3 weeks settled into a rhythm Clara had not expected. She woke before dawn, started the cook stove. She had learned its moods now. When to open the damper, when to add another log. The first 2 loaves of bread had come out burnt. The third was edible. By the second week, she could coax biscuits from the old Enterprise that rivaled any she had made in Philadelphia. Caleb left at first light, returned at dusk. They ate supper together at the pine table, the lamp casting a warm circle around their plates. She asked about his day. He answered in fragments, checked the north fence, rode to the creek, weather's holding. The silence between them was not hostile. It was careful. 2 people learning each other's edges without pressing too hard. Clara made the cabin her own. She beat the rugs until no dust rose, scrubbed the floors with lye soap, mended the tear in the bedroom curtain with thread that still didn't quite match. She found herself glancing at the loose floorboards sometimes, thinking of the woman in the photograph, Margaret Stone, the eyes that matched Caleb's. On Saturday mornings, Caleb rode to town. Clara watched from the window as he disappeared down the road, dust rising behind his horse. 1 week. She followed on foot, not to spy, she told herself, but to buy supplies. The walk took the better part of an hour. She found him at the telegraph office. Through the window, she saw him hand a folded paper to the clerk, receive one in return. He read it standing, his face giving nothing away. Then he folded it into his pocket and walked out. He passed her on the street without a word, just a nod, as if seeing his wife in town was the most ordinary thing in the world. At Tucker's general store, Clara waited her turn behind 2 ranch hands buying tobacco. Her eyes drifted to the wall behind the counter, where a large survey map hung, pinned at the corners with brass tacks. The territory spread out in faded ink mountains, creeks, property lines marked in different colors. She studied the names: Henderson, Miller, Brennan, Stone. The Stone holdings covered more area than she expected. "Help you, ma'am." Silas Tucker stood behind the counter, tobacco juice staining the corner of his mouth. His eyes were sharp beneath bushy gray brows. Flour, salt, coffee. He gathered the items slowly. "You're Stone's bride." "I am," Tucker nodded. Something flickered in his expression, not pity, not curiosity, something closer to assessment. "He's a good man, known him since he was knee-high." He set the sack of flour on the counter. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Clara paid and left. The words stayed with her all the way home. Letters arrived every week, cream-colored envelopes with wax seals red, sometimes green, always pressed with initials she did not recognize. Caleb read them in the barn or by the corral, never in the house. She found the broken seals in the fireplace ash, curled and blackened but still bearing the ghost of their marks. She did not ask about them. On the 3rd Sunday, they attended church. The congregation stared. Clara felt the weight of their eyes as she walked down the aisle beside Caleb. Women leaned toward each other, whispering behind hymnals. Men watched with expressions she could not read. They sat in a pew near the back. The minister spoke of patience and providence. Clara barely heard the words. She was too aware of the silence around them, the careful distance the other families kept. After the service, a man approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit too fine for this country. A gold watch chain glinted at his vest. His smile was wide and did not reach his eyes. "Stone!" He clapped Caleb's shoulder too hard. Clara noticed. "Still playing poor. I see. Some of us aren't fooled." Caleb's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The man turned to Clara, his smile widening. "Mrs. Stone, Harlan Griggs, welcome to Copper Creek." He tipped his hat and walked away, his laugh trailing behind him like smoke. Clara looked at Caleb. His face had gone still, closed off. What did he mean? Nothing. Caleb took her arm and guided her toward the wagon. "He talks too much." But the words burned in Clara's mind all the way home. Still playing poor. That night, she woke to lamplight bleeding under her door. She lay still, listening. The scratch of a quill on paper, the creak of a chair, a soft sound that might have been pages turning. She rose, crossed the cold floorboards in her bare feet, cracked the door open. Caleb sat at the table, hunched over a leather-bound ledger. The brass lock lay open beside it. His quill moved across the page in steady strokes, filling columns with figures. She caught glimpses of the numbers as the lamp flickered. Thousands, tens of thousands. Names she did not recognize, property names. She realized creek boundaries, cattle counts, acreage. Clara's breath poured. The pen in Caleb's hand moved with precision. Careful, practiced, the same way her father's hand had moved when he balanced the factory accounts late at night, thinking she was asleep. This was not the hand of an uneducated man. She must have made a sound. Caleb's head snapped up. His eyes found hers in the darkness. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he closed the ledger, turned the brass key, slid it into his pocket. "Go back to sleep." Clara did not move. "What is it you do when you write out?" Caleb rose from the chair. The lamp threw his shadow long across the wall. "I watch things." He walked past her, into the darkness beyond the cabin door. She heard his boots on the porch, then nothing. Clara stood alone in the main room, the smell of ink and lamp oil sharp in her nostrils. On the table, the ledger sat like a locked box. Beside it, the quill lay across the inkpot, a single drop of black bleeding into the wood grain. She thought of the survey map at Tucker's store, the stone holdings, larger than she had expected. She thought of the letters with their wax seals, burned in the fireplace, the telegraph messages Caleb read and never mentioned. Griggs's words at the church, spoken like an accusation, still playing poor. Old Silas Tucker had nodded to Caleb after the service, not casual, but deep, like a salute between soldiers. Clara walked to the table, picked up her mending from the chair where she had left it. Set it down again. She did not pick it up. Outside, the coyotes began to call. The sound drifted through the walls, lonely and searching. Clara stood at the window and watched the darkness where Caleb had disappeared. Who was this man she had married, and what was he hiding behind those careful, quiet eyes? Clara found him saddling the horses before dawn. The air held the sharp edge of early morning, dew still clinging to the grass around the barn. She stood in the doorway, her shawl pulled tight, watching him cinch the leather strap beneath the bay's belly. I want to come with you. Caleb's hands paused. He did not turn around. It's a long ride. I can manage. He considered this. Then he nodded once and led out the old mare, a gray, with a patient eye and a gait slow enough for someone who'd learned to ride on cobblestone streets, not open range. They rode out as the sun cracked the horizon. The land spread wide and gold in the early light. Caleb guided his horse along the ridge line, and Clara followed, her skirt arranged carefully over the side saddle, her hands steady on the reins. He pointed to a stand of willows in the distance. Creek runs through there, feeds the Henderson place, the Miller spread, and 3 other homesteads down the valley. She noted how he said it, not like a man describing someone else's property, like a man taking inventory. They passed a fence line where the posts stood crooked, half of them rotting at the base. Caleb slowed his horse, studied the damage, then moved on without comment. A quarter-mile later, another fence, this one solid, the wire strung tight. You know every inch of this, Clara said. A man ought to know what he's looking at. The sod house appeared around mid-morning. Grass grew thick on the roof, and the walls seemed to rise straight out of the earth itself. A thin line of smoke curled from a makeshift chimney. Laundry hung on a rope strung between 2 posts. Small shirts, patched dresses, a woman's apron faded nearly white. Caleb dismounted. He pulled a sack of flour from his saddlebag, tied with twine, and carried it to the door. He set it on the step, did not knock, did not call out. He was back in the saddle before Clara could speak. They rode in silence for nearly a mile before she found the question. Why didn't you let them know? She's got her pride. Caleb kept his eyes on the trail. I ain't gonna take that from her. The widow, Mrs. Henderson. 4 children, husband died in a rock slide 2 winters back. She's been holding that place together with spit and stubbornness ever since. Clara looked back. The sod house had disappeared behind a rise. You do this often. Often enough. Do they know it's you? They think it's the church. He shrugged. Suits me fine. They stopped to water the horses at a creek that ran cold and clear over smooth stones. Clara climbed down, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle, and knelt at the water's edge. She cupped her hands, drank, felt the chill run down her throat and settle in her chest. Caleb stood a few feet away, watching the tree line. You know this land better than anyone I've met, she said. You know who's struggling, who needs help, where every fence post stands, but you live in a cabin with 1 good chair and a cook stove you barely use. He did not answer. The ledger I saw, the one you write in at night. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. Those numbers don't match this life. Caleb. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, the only sound was the creek running over the stones and a meadowlark calling somewhere in the grass. Folks show you who they are, he said finally. When they think you got nothing. Is that what you're doing, testing people? I'm watching. He turned to face her. Same as I always do. And what have I shown you? The question hung between them. Caleb's eyes moved over her face, not assessing this time, but searching. Looking for something he might have missed. You stayed, he said. Clara felt the words settle into her like stones dropped into still water. She wanted to ask what that meant. She wanted to know what others had done, the ones who hadn't stayed. But the look on his face told her this was all she would get. For now. They rode back as the sun began its long slide toward the mountains. The cabin looked different in the evening light. Smaller, somehow, but solid. Smoke rose from the chimney she had banked the fire before leaving. And it had held, Caleb unsaddled the horses while Clara started supper. Salt pork, beans, cornbread from the batch she'd made the day before. Simple food, the kind that filled a body without asking for gratitude. They ate on the porch as the sky turned rose and gold and finally deep blue. Caleb brought out 2 cups of coffee, black and bitter, still hot from the pot. He handed her one without a word and settled into the chair beside hers. The first fireflies rose from the grass. Clara watched them drift upward, small sparks of light against the darkening land. The air smelled of sage and dust and the faint sweetness of the cottonwoods by the creek. Caleb's hand rested on the porch rail, rough wood, splinters catching the last light. Her hand rested inches away. Neither moved closer. Neither moved away. "My father built this cabin," he said. His voice was low, almost lost in the evening sounds. "Cut every log himself. Said he wanted me to know what honest work felt like before I knew what easy money felt like." Clara waited. The fireflies rose higher. The stars began to show, one by one, like holes punched in dark cloth. "He was a hard man," Caleb continued. "Got harder after my mother passed. Didn't trust anyone by the end. Died in a big house, with hired men standing guard at the door, and not a single soul who cared whether he took another breath." His hand lifted from the rail. He turned the coffee cup in his fingers, staring into the dark liquid. "I promised myself I wouldn't end up like that." Clara's throat tightened. She did not speak, did not move. The silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of things neither of them had words for yet. Somewhere down the valley, a coyote called, another answered. Caleb set down his cup, stood, looked out at the land, his land, though he'd never said it, and then back at her. "You asked what you've shown me," he said. "I told you. You stayed. But there's something else." "What?" "You didn't ask what was in it for you." He held her gaze. "Everyone else asked. First thing out of their mouths. What do I get? What's my share? How much is the land worth?" He shook his head. "You just picked up a broom and started sweeping." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. The tin was cooling now, the warmth fading. "I didn't know there was anything to ask for," she said. "That's my point." He turned and walked toward the barn. The door creaked open, then closed behind him. Clara sat alone on the porch, the fireflies drifting around her, the stars multiplying overhead. Her coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The ledger, the sack of flour left on a widow's doorstep, the way he watched the land like a man guarding something precious. The pieces were there, scattered like cards across a table. She just couldn't see the pattern yet. But she would, tomorrow. She would start watching, too. The hoofbeats woke her. Clara lay still in the narrow bed, her eyes open in the darkness, listening. The rhythm was unmistakable, a single horse, moving fast, heading away from the cabin. She pushed back the quilt and crossed to the window. Moonlight washed the yard silver. Caleb's bay was gone from the corral. She caught a glimpse of movement on the north ridge, a dark shape against the darker sky, and then nothing. The clock on the mantel read midnight. She stood at the window until her feet went numb on the cold floorboards. The rider did not return. Sleep did not come. She watched the square of moonlight crawl across the floor and thought about the ledger, the flower on the widow's doorstep, the way Caleb watched the land like a man guarding something precious. Dawn arrived gray and quiet. Clara dressed, started the cook stove, put coffee on to boil. The familiar motions steadied her hands. She heard him come in through the back, his boots on the floorboards, the creak of the chair as he sat to pull them off. Clara did not turn from the stove. She listened to the sounds leather against wood, the soft thud of each boot hitting the floor, then silence. She poured 2 cups of coffee, carried them to the table, set one in front of him. His boots sat by the door. She looked at them without seeming to look. Red clay, thick and wet, caked around the soles and heels. The soil around the cabin was brown, sandy, shot through with granite dust. This clay came from somewhere else. She remembered the survey map at Tucker's store. The red clay deposits marked along the north ridge, near the old Brennan place. "Sleep well?" Caleb asked. "Well enough?" She sat across from him, wrapped her hands around her cup. "You, same as always." They drank in silence. Clara watched the steam rise from her coffee, curling in the morning light that came through the window. They ate breakfast without speaking. Eggs, salt pork, the last of the cornbread. Clara cleared the plates, washed them in the basin, set them to dry on the wooden rack beside the stove. The day passed slowly. She mended a tear in her second-best dress, beat the rugs on the porch railing, swept the floors for the 3rd time that week, all the while. Her mind circled back to the boots, the clay, the empty cabin 4 miles north. By supper, she could not hold the question any longer. Caleb sat at the table, his plate half finished, his eyes on some middle distance beyond the window. Clara set down her fork. The sound of metal on tin seemed loud in the quiet room. "You rode to the Brennan cabin last night." His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. He set the fork down carefully. "That's 4 miles north." Clara continued. "The clay on your boots, it doesn't match the soil here. I saw that red clay marked on the survey map at Tucker's store. It's along the north ridge, near the old Brennan place." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, something closer to recognition. "You noticed the mud." "I notice most things." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he pushed back his chair and crossed to the fireplace. His fingers found a stone in the lower right corner, a stone that looked like all the others, but sat slightly loose in the mortar. He pulled it free. Behind it, a cavity in the wall. He reached inside and drew out a leather satchel, stiff with age. The brass buckles tarnished green. He brought it to the table, opened it, spread the contents across the worn pine surface. Deeds, survey maps, bank records, letters bearing wax seals. Some broken, some still intact, and on every deed, every map, every document that mattered a single name: Caleb Stone. Clara's breath caught. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the nearest deed. The paper was thick, official, stamped with the seal of the county recorder. The ink had faded to brown, but the signature was clear. She traced the letters: Caleb Stone, the same hand that had written her name on butcher paper at the train station. "This is dated 12 years ago," she said. "My father's land." Caleb's voice was flat, controlled. "He left it to me when he passed. The largest holdings in the territory, 12,000 acres, give or take. Timber rights, water rights, mineral claims that ain't been surveyed yet." Clara looked up at him. The lamplight caught the hard lines of his face, the shadows under his eyes. "You own all of this." It was not a question. "I own more than this." He gestured toward the window, toward the valley, the mountains, the town beyond. The ground under half of Copper Creek, the water that feeds every ranch between here and the Brennan Ridge. land that men like Harlan Griggs would kill to control. But you live here. Clara looked around the cabin, the worn furniture, the patched curtains, the cook stove she had scrubbed with her own hands. You live like a man who has nothing. Because I wanted to know. Know what? Caleb's hands curled into fists on the table. He stared at the documents spread before him, his face rigid. After Ma died, they came, every one of them, women who smiled too sweet and laughed too easy. Men who suddenly wanted to be my friend, who offered partnerships and deals and handshakes that meant nothing. They came for the money, for the land, for what they could take. His voice roughened. He cleared his throat. My father saw it. Made him hard. Made him mean, by the end. He didn't trust anyone, not even me. Caleb looked up, met her eyes. I swore I wouldn't become that. But I also swore I'd never be fooled again. Clara's chest tightened. She understood now. The faded shirts, the cracked boots, the cabin with one good chair and a stove he barely used. So she gestured at the room, at the life she had stepped into. This was a test. I reckon it was. The words hit her like a slap. She sat very still, her hands flat on the table, her pulse loud in her ears. He had watched her scrub floors and mend curtains and cook meals from almost nothing. He had watched her walk to town and endure the whispers and come back without complaint. And all of it, every moment, had been a test. Did I pass? Caleb did not answer. Clara pushed back her chair. The legs scraped against the floorboards, harsh and sudden. She walked to the door and stopped, her hand on the frame. The wood was rough under her fingers. She gripped it hard, hard enough to feel the grain press into her palm. She wanted to turn around, wanted to demand an answer, wanted to know if any of it the fireflies on the porch. The silence that had begun to feel like understanding. The way he had said you stayed had been real, but she could not bring herself to look at his face, not yet. She pushed the door open and walked into the night. The air was cool on her skin, sharp with the smell of sage and dust. Stars scattered across the sky, thick and bright. She walked until she reached the fence at the edge of the yard, then stopped, her hands gripping the rough-hewn rail. Behind her, the cabin door remained open. A rectangle of lamplight spilled across the packed earth. He had not followed. Clara stared at the mountains, black shapes against the blue-black sky. Her mind churned through everything she had learned, the land, the money, the women who had come before her, the test she had not known she was taking. But one question cut through all the others, sharp as a blade. If he had been testing her all along, then what was she supposed to do now that she knew? Clara woke in the barn with straw in her hair and a crick in her neck. Gray light filtered through the gaps in the wooden slats. The horses stirred in their stalls, the bay nickering softly at her movement. She sat up, pushed the wool blanket aside, and pressed her palms against her eyes until the pressure steadied her. Her back ached from the hard ground. She picked straw from her collar, from her sleeves, from the hem of her dress. She had slept here, on a pile of straw, wrapped in a horse blanket that smelled of sweat and leather and dust. Because she could not bring herself to go back inside, not after what he had told her. The walk to the cabin felt longer than it should have. Her legs were stiff, her back ached, and her dress was wrinkled beyond any hope of pressing. She pushed open the door and stopped. The main room was empty. The fire had burned down to coals. The documents from last night were gone, the deeds, the maps, the letters with their broken seals. All of it cleared away, tucked back into the satchel that now sat on Caleb's chair, buckled and waiting. On the table sat a single envelope, cream-colored paper, thick and official. The seal was already broken. Clara picked it up. The letterhead read, Office of the County Clerk. Copper Creek, Montana Territory. Her eyes moved down the page, catching phrases, formal claim filed. Water rights pertaining to Brennan Creek and its tributaries. Petitioner, Harlan Griggs. Hearing to be held. The date was today, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She read the letter twice more. The claim would divert water from 5 small ranches, the Hendersons, the Millers, 3 others whose names she did not recognize. Families that depended on that creek to keep their livestock alive, their crops growing, their children fed. Caleb's horse was gone from the corral. Clara dressed quickly, pinned her hair beneath her bonnet, and walked to town. The church hall was already crowded when she arrived. Wooden benches lined the walls, filled with men in work clothes and women in plain dresses. The air smelled of dust and sweat and the faint sweetness of the hymnal stacked in the corner. A brass spittoon sat near the door. Recently used, Clara found a spot near the back. She scanned the room for Caleb and found him in the far corner, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His hat pulled low. He did not look at her. Harlan Griggs stood at the front of the room, beside a table covered with documents. His suit was Eastern cut, the fabric too fine for this country, the buttons polished to a shine. He smiled as he spoke, his voice smooth and practiced. Progress, he was saying. That's what this is about. Proper management of resources. The water in Brennan Creek has been running wild for too long, feeding land that can't support itself. My proposal would channel that water to productive use to ranches that can actually make something of it. A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara watched the faces of the small ranchers, the tension in their shoulders. The way their hands gripped their knees. Mrs. Henderson sat in the 3rd row, her face drawn, her work-roughened hands clasped tight in her lap. She knew what this meant. They all did. They just didn't know how to stop it. The law is clear, Griggs continued. Prior rights must be established and documented if no one can prove a superior claim. The water goes to the petitioner with the strongest case. He spread his hands, palms up, as if offering a gift. That would be me. Clara's fingers curled into fists in her lap. She thought of the sack of flour left on the Henderson doorstep, the way Caleb had ridden through the dawn to check fence lines and water holes, never asking for thanks, never expecting recognition, the ledger filled with names and numbers, tracking who needed help and when. He could stop this. He had the deeds, the documents, the proof of prior rights that would crush Griggs's claim in an instant. But revealing them would expose everything, the wealth he had hidden, the teat he had been running, the lie he had built his life around. She looked at him across the room. He stood motionless, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls. He was not going to speak. Silas Tucker sat 2 rows ahead. His head turned slightly. His eyes found Clara's. He gave a small nod, barely perceptible, but deliberate. Clara stood. The movement drew eyes. The murmuring stopped. Griggs paused mid-sentence, his smile flickering. "I'm new here," Clara said. Her voice came out steady, stronger than she expected. "I don't know much about water rights or legal claims or how things work in this territory." She stepped into the aisle between the benches. The floorboards creaked under her weight. "But I've been watching." That's about all a newcomer can do, watch and learn. She turned to face the room. her back to Griggs. "I've seen a man leave flour on a widow's doorstep before dawn, then ride away without knocking. I've seen him check on neighbors who got nothing to give back, mend fences that ain't his, carry water to stock that don't belong to him." The silence in the room was complete. Even the dust motes seemed to hang motionless in the afternoon light. "I've seen him sit on his porch and watch this land like it's something precious." Clara's eyes found Mrs. Henderson, the thin woman with tired eyes and work-roughened hands. "I've seen him care for people who don't even know he's doing it." She turned to Griggs. His smile had gone rigid. "What I haven't seen," she said, "is Mr. Griggs do a single thing for anyone in this room." A breath of sound ran through the crowd, not quite agreement, but something close. Griggs recovered quickly. He straightened his lapels, his smile smoothing back into place. "This isn't a charity meeting, Mrs. Stone. This is law. Sentiment doesn't establish water rights. Documents do. And unless your husband can produce evidence of prior claim, some things I know ain't mine to tell." The voice came from the side of the room. Silas Tucker rose from his bench, tobacco juice staining the corner of his mouth, his eyes hard and steady. "I've known Caleb Stone since he was knee-high to a fence post," Tucker said. "Knew his daddy before him. There's things in this valley that ain't always written down, but that don't make them less true." He nodded toward Clara. "That girl's speaking true. You all know it." Griggs's jaw tightened. "Mr. Tucker, unless you have legal documentation to present, I reckon law and right ain't always the same thing." Clara heard the words leave her own mouth before she realized she was speaking. They hung in the air, sharp and clear. Griggs stared at her. For a moment, his mask slipped. Something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes. "This hearing is adjourned," the county clerk announced from his seat near the window. "We'll reconvene in 1 week to allow all parties to gather their evidence." The room erupted into motion. Benches scraped against the floor. Voices rose in argument and confusion. Clara stood still in the middle of it all, her heart pounding against her ribs. She walked toward the door. The sunlight outside was blinding after the dimness of the hall. A hand caught her arm. She turned. Caleb stood behind her, his face pale beneath the tan, his grip firm, but not painful. "You didn't have to do that." Clara pulled her arm free. "I know. You don't understand what you just... I understand plenty." She held his gaze. "I understand you were going to let them take everything from those families rather than show who you really are." His mouth opened, closed. No words came. Clara turned and walked down the steps of the church hall. Her legs felt unsteady. Her hands were shaking, but she did not stop. She walked past the general store, past the livery, past the women who had whispered about her since the day she arrived. None of them said a word. She was halfway home before she heard the hoofbeats behind her. Caleb pulled his horse alongside, slowing to match her pace. He did not speak. She did not look at him. They walked in silence for nearly a mile. Finally, he said, "Griggs won't let this go." "I know. He's got lawyers, money, connections in the territorial government." "I know." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The only way to beat him is to show the deeds, all of them. Everything my father left me." Clara stopped walking. She turned to face him. "Then show them. If I do that, everyone in this valley will know. The way they look at me, the way they look at you, it'll all change. It's already changed." Clara's voice was steady. "The only question is whether you let Griggs win or you fight back." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing the tension. "There's something else," he said. "Something I ain't told you." Clara waited. Griggs's ranch, the land his house sits on. The fields, the corrals, all of it. Caleb's voice dropped. "It's mine. My father bought it 30 years ago. Griggs has been leasing it this whole time. He just doesn't know who from." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mind racing. "You own his land. Every acre. Then why haven't you?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of man he was." Caleb's eyes were hard. "Now I know." Clara's chest tightened. The implications unfolded in her mind, the power Caleb held, the weapons he had kept sheathed, the game that had been playing out beneath the surface of this valley for years. "What are you going to do?" Caleb looked past her, toward the mountains, toward the town, toward the church hall where Griggs was probably already planning his next move. "I'm going to end this," he said. "But I need to know something first." "What?" His eyes came back to her face. In them, she saw something she had not seen before. Not caution, not guardedness, but something raw, something that looked almost like fear. "When this is over," he said, "when everyone knows the truth about the land and the money and everything I've been hiding, are you going to stay?" Clara opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats reached them from the direction of town, fast, urgent, coming closer. The rider was Silas Tucker. He pulled his horse to a stop, dust swirling around the animal's legs, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "Griggs is spreading talk," he said, "saying your wife made a fool of herself at the meeting, saying she's got no business speaking up for a man she barely knows." His eyes moved to Clara. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Figured you ought to hear it from a friend before you hear it on the street." Tucker rode on toward town. Clara and Caleb walked the rest of the way to the cabin in silence. That night, she slept in the bedroom. He slept in the barn. Neither spoke of it. The days that followed moved like mud. Clara went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, mending, but the rhythm that had begun to feel natural now felt hollow. She cooked. He ate. Neither looked at the other. Every task reminded her of what she had been doing, performing for an audience of one, proving herself worthy without knowing she was being judged. She avoided the mirror. She could not bear to look at her own face. On the second day, she walked to town for supplies. Mrs. Harmon stood behind the counter at the general store, her smile too wide, her voice too sweet. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Stone, we were all so entertained by your little speech at the meeting." Clara's hands tightened on the edge of the counter, the wood grain pressed into her palms. "Flour?" she said. "Salt? Coffee? Of course, of course." Mrs. Harmon gathered the items slowly, deliberately. "You know, honey, some of us have been here a long time. We know how things work. A woman new to town might want to be careful about stepping into the matters she don't fully understand." Clara said nothing. She paid for the supplies, took the paper sack in her arms, and walked out. The sun was too bright. The street was too loud. She could feel eyes on her from every window, every doorway. The whispers followed her like flies. She made it to the edge of town before her legs gave out. The road dipped here, where the spring rains had carved a low spot that never quite dried. Clara's foot caught the edge. She stumbled forward, her arms pinwheeling, the sack of supplies flying from her grip. She landed hard on her hands and knees, in the mud. It soaked through her dress, instantly cold, thick, black as tar. It splattered up her arms, across her bodice, onto her face. She could taste it on her lips. Gritty and sour. The flour sack had burst on impact. White powder mixing with the muck into a gray paste that clung to everything. She heard laughter. 2 women stood on the boardwalk across the street, their hands pressed to their mouths, their eyes bright with malicious delight. Clara knelt there in the mud, her dress ruined. Her dignity scattered like the flour. She tried to stand and slipped again. Her palms sinking deeper into the mire, a sob rose in her throat. She swallowed it down, but her shoulders shook. She had defended him, in front of the whole town. She had stood up and spoken when no one else would, and she had done it for a man who had been testing her like a horse he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. The shame of it burned worse than the cold, seeping through her clothes. She finally pulled herself up, her shoes squelching, mud dripping from her hem. She did not look at the women on the boardwalk. She gathered what supplies she could salvage and walked home with her head down, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on the dusty road. On the 3rd day, Caleb did not come in for supper. Clara ate alone, washed the single plate, banked the fire. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had. The walls pressing in, the silence thick enough to choke on. She walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and gold, the mountains going purple in the distance. She scanned the yard, the corral, the barn, empty. Her eyes moved up the hillside behind the cabin. A figure stood near the top, silhouetted against the fading light, motionless. Clara walked. The grass was dry beneath her feet, crackling with each step. The slope was steeper than it looked, and by the time she reached the top, her breath came hard and her legs burned. Caleb stood before a wooden cross, hand-carved. The letters cut deep into the weathered wood Margaret Stone had to 1832 to 1862. Wildflowers lay scattered at the base Indian paintbrush and columbine, the same flowers he had left in the tin cup on the table her first morning in the cabin. Clara stopped a few feet away. She did not speak. The sun dropped lower, the shadows lengthened, the first star appeared above the eastern ridge. Faint and solitary, "She married my father for love." Caleb's voice was rough, scraped raw at the edges. He did not turn around. "Folks said she married him for money, said she was a fortune hunter, a schemer, a woman who'd do anything to get her hands on land and cattle." He paused. Wasn't true. She loved him, but the talk, it never stopped. It followed her everywhere, poisoned everything she touched. Clara's throat tightened. She waited. By the end, she couldn't walk into town without people whispering, couldn't go to church without feeling their eyes on her back. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring whether she lived or died. Caleb's shoulders hunched. I was 10 when she passed. I found her in the bedroom, still in her nightdress, cold. I remember her hands, cold as the floorboards. I remember the light through the window. The doctor said it was her heart, but I knew better. This valley killed her. The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt them settle into her bones. And your father. He went hard after that, hard and mean and suspicious of everyone. Built a big house, hired men to guard it, counted his money every night, like it might disappear if he closed his eyes. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. He died alone in that house, 63 years old. Not a soul who mourned him. I buried him beside her and swore I'd never end up the same way. He turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were wet. That's why I did it. The cabin, the test, all of it. His voice cracked. I didn't want to become him. suspicious of everybody, dying alone in a big house full of nothing that mattered. Clara looked at him, at the grief carved into his face, at the shame in his eyes, at the way his whole body seemed to slump like a man finally letting go of a weight too heavy to carry. "But you did become him," she said quietly. "You tested me. You watched me scrub your floors and cook your meals and walk through town with my head high while people laughed at me. And you said nothing." Caleb flinched as if she had struck him. "I stood up for you in that church hall," Clara continued. "I defended a man I thought I was beginning to understand. And then I found out I was just another test." Her voice shook. "Do you know what that feels like? To realize you've been performing for an audience you didn't know that was watching?" "Clara, I sold my mother's brooch for train fare." The words came out before she could stop them. "It was all I had left of her. A cameo she wore every Sunday to church, every Christmas morning, every birthday I can remember. I pawned it in Philadelphia for $12 to buy a ticket to a man I'd never met, because I thought I believed that starting over was better than dying slow in a city that had taken everything else." She pressed her hand against her chest, where the brooch should have been. "I came here with nothing, nothing but my hands and my word. And you watched me prove myself over and over, and you never once told me the truth." Caleb's face had gone pale. His mouth opened, closed, no words came. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The words came out cracked and broken. "I'm sorry. I couldn't." He stopped. His hands hung at his sides, useless. Clara looked at the grave marker, at the flowers scattered at its base, at the dew who had brought them here, week after week, year after year, trying to make amends to a woman who could no longer hear him. "Your mother," she said softly, "did she ever know how much you loved her?" Caleb's breath caught. "I don't know," he whispered. "I was 10. I didn't know how to say it. And then she was gone." The last light faded from the sky. The stars emerged, one by one, scattered across the darkness like salt spilled on a black cloth. Clara reached out. Her fingers found his hand, cold, trembling. He flinched at the touch, a small, involuntary jerk, and then his fingers closed around hers. They stood in the darkness, two figures on a hillside, holding hands above an old grave. No words, no explanations, just the silence holding what words could not. Below them, a lamp flickered to life in the cabin window. Someone had lit it. Clara turned. Squinted into the darkness. A horse stood tied to the porch rail. A horse she did not recognize. They came down the hillside fast, their boots sliding on the dry grass. The horse at the porch rail was a chestnut mare with a white blaze. Clara did not recognize it. Caleb's hand moved to his hip, an old habit. She realized, from a time when men carried more than pocket knives. The cabin door opened. Silas Tucker stepped onto the porch, his face lit by the kerosene lamp behind him. "Figured you'd be up there," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes moved between them with a sharpness that belied the stillness of his body. Griggs moved the hearing up. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Caleb's jaw tightened. "He can't do that." "He did." Tucker spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Got word to the county clerk an hour ago. Said he had urgent business in Helena and couldn't wait another week. Frontier law moves fast when money's involved." The clerk agreed. Clara's stomach dropped. She looked at Caleb, at the lines of tension in his face, at the way his hands curled into fists at his saw. "Can we fight it?" she asked. Tucker shook his head. "Legal. Just barely. but legal. Griggs knows the rules well enough to bend them without breaking. He looked at Caleb. You got until morning to decide what you're going to do. He mounted his horse and rode into the darkness. The hoofbeats faded. The night went quiet. Caleb stood motionless on the porch, staring at nothing. Clara touched his arm. Come inside. They sat at the table in the lamplight, the satchel between them. Caleb unbuckled it and spread the documents across the pine surface, the deeds, the surveys, the bank records, evidence of everything he had hidden for a decade. If I show these, he said slowly, everything changes. I know. The way people look at me, the way they treat me, the way they treat you. He rubbed his face with both hands. It'll all be different. Clara looked at the papers, at the signatures, at the official seals stamped in faded red ink. It's already different, she said. It changed the moment I stood up in that church hall. You can't undo that. The only question now is whether you let Griggs win or you fight back. Caleb's eyes met hers. Something moved behind them. Not fear. Exactly. But something close. The look of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. There's a trunk under the bed, he said finally. My father's suit. It's wrapped in linen. Clara found it where he said it would be, the heavy wooden trunk with brass fittings she had noticed her first night in the cabin. Dust thick on its surface. She lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in muslin that smelled of mothballs and cedar, lay a suit of fine black wool. The cut was old-fashioned, but the fabric was still good, barely worn. She carried it to the main room and spread it across the table. The shoulders are too narrow, she said. The sleeves are short. I'll need to let them out. She worked through the night. The lamp burned low, and she trimmed the wick. Her needle moved through the dark fabric, pulling stitches, resetting seams. Caleb sat by the fire, feeding it logs when the flames died down, saying nothing. The clock on the mantel ticked away the hours. Her eyes burned, her fingers ached. By the time the first gray light crept through the windows, her hands trembled from exhaustion, but her stitches held true. Clara held the suit up, examining her work in the pale dawn. Try it on. Caleb stripped off his worn shirt and pulled on the fine cotton one she had pressed by the fire. The trousers fit close. The waistcoat buttoned smooth across his chest. The jacket settled on his shoulders like it had been made for him. He looked different, not taller, not broader, but somehow more solid, more present, as if the clothes had revealed something that had always been there, hidden beneath the faded shirts and cracked boots. Well, Clara said, now you look like a man who owns 12,000 acres. Caleb did not smile, but something in his eyes softened. The courthouse was packed by the time they arrived. Every bench was full. Men lined the walls, hats in hands. Women stood in the back, fanning themselves against the morning heat. The air smelled of dust and sweat and the faint sweetness of hair oil. Clara walked beside Caleb down the center aisle. She felt the eyes on them curious, skeptical, hungry for spectacle. Mrs. Harmon sat near the front, her face pinched with anticipation. Harlan Griggs stood at the petitioner's table, his lawyer beside him, stacks of documents arranged in neat piles. His suit was finer than Caleb's, his boots polished to a mirror shine, his smile fixed in place like a mask. But Clara noticed something she had not seen before, a tightness around his eyes, a rigidity in his shoulders. He looked like a man who had been fighting himself for years and was growing tired of the battle. Mr. Stone, the judge said from his bench, You have 1 hour to present evidence of prior claim. Do you have documentation to submit? Caleb rose. He carried the leather satchel, the same one Clara had seen him pull from the wall. He walked to the front of the room and set it on the table. The buckles clicked as he opened it. One by one, he laid out the documents: deeds, surveys, bank records, letters of transfer, each one stamped with official seals, each one bearing his name or his father's name. Each one dated years, decades before Griggs had set foot in Montana territory. The room went silent. Clara watched the faces around her, the confusion, the dawning recognition, the slow transformation as understanding spread through the crowd. Caleb's voice was steady as he spoke. The water rights to Brennan Creek were established by my father in 1852. They have been in continuous use by the Stone family ever since. I have documentation here showing legal transfer to my name upon my father's death in 1872. He laid another document on the table. Furthermore, the land currently occupied by Mr. Griggs, the ranch house, the corrals, the grazing fields, was purchased by my father in 1854. Mr. Griggs has been leasing that land through a third-party arrangement for the past 8 years. He paused. He has been paying rent to me. The silence shattered. Voices erupted throughout the room. Men shouted questions. Women turned to whisper to their neighbors. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the noise only grew. Clara looked at Griggs. His face had gone white. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles bloodless. The mask of confidence had cracked and fallen away, revealing something raw underneath, not anger, not defiance, but something closer to collapse. He looked like a man watching his whole world slide into the sea. The judge restored order. He examined the documents one by one, holding each to the light, comparing signatures, checking seals. The room waited in agonizing silence. The evidence is clear, the judge said finally. Prior claim is established. The petition filed by Mr. Griggs is denied. The room erupted again. This time, no one tried to quiet it. Clara stood. Her legs felt unsteady, her heart pounding against her ribs. She moved toward Caleb, pushing through the crowd of well-wishers who suddenly wanted to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to claim friendship with the man they had mocked for years. She found him near the door, his face pale, his eyes distant. "You did it," she said. He looked at her. In his eyes, she saw no triumph, no satisfaction, only a weary kind of relief. Like a man who had carried a weight for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "It's done," he said, outside. The sun was bright and the street was full of people. They parted for Caleb and Clara like water around stones. Mrs. Harmon rushed up. Her face transformed into something Clara barely recognized. Warmth where there had been contempt. Admiration where there had been mockery. "Oh, Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone, I always knew." Clara walked past her without a word. They were halfway to the wagon when Clara heard the footsteps behind them. Heavy, hurried, she turned. Griggs stood 10 feet away. His fine suit was rumpled now, his hair disheveled, his face still carrying that look of ruin. But something else was there too, something Clara had not expected. "Stone!" Caleb stopped, turned. Griggs opened his mouth, closed it. His hands trembled at his sides. "I knew," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I knew the whole time. About the lease. About who owned the land. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd stay hidden. that you'd let me take what I wanted rather than show yourself." He looked down at his polished boots, at the dust settling on the leather. "My father lost everything in the war. Everything. I spent 30 years clawing my way back, building something, proving I was worth more than the nothing I came from." He swallowed hard. "I told myself it didn't matter how I did it, that winning was all that counted." His voice broke. He stood there in the street, stripped bare before the town that had respected him, waiting for judgment. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air. Clara watched Griggs, watched the way his shoulders sagged, the way his hands hung limp at his sides. This was not a performance. This was a man confronting the ugliness he had spent years refusing to see. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "The lease terms stay the same," he said. "You can keep the ranch." Griggs's eyes widened. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. Caleb turned and walked toward the wagon. Clara followed, behind them. Harlan Griggs stood alone in the street, the crowd parting around him, his empire intact, but his pride in ruins. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. Caleb took the reins as they pulled away from town. She looked at him, at the suit that fit him like armor, at the set of his jaw, at the quiet exhaustion in his eyes. Why, she asked, after everything he did, why let him keep the ranch? Caleb did not answer immediately. The wagon rolled past the last buildings, past the church, past the general store where Mrs. Harmon stood watching from the window. "Because my father would have destroyed him," he said finally, "and I swore I wouldn't become my father." Clara turned the words over in her mind. She thought of Margaret Stone, buried on the hillside, of the man who had died alone in a big house, of the son who had spent 10 years trying to escape their shadows. The wagon crested the rise. Below them, the cabin sat waiting small, weathered, unchanged, but Clara knew that nothing would be the same, and she still had not answered his question from the day before. A week passed. The valley settled back into its rhythms. Cattle grazed on the hillsides, smoke rose from chimneys. The creek ran clear and cold, feeding the land as it had for generations. Clara stood at the cabin window, watching the morning light spread across the grass. The cook stove behind her popped and hissed, the coffee just starting to boil. She had learned its moods now, when to open the damper, when to add another log, how to coax heat from the iron without flooding the room with smoke. Caleb's footsteps crossed the porch. The door opened. He stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his face carrying an expression she had not seen before, not guarded, not watchful, something closer to uncertainty. "I've been thinking," he said. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the table, waited. "I can build you a proper house." He turned the hat in his hands, working the brim between his fingers. "Anything you want. 2 stories, glass windows, a real kitchen with a pump inside so you don't have to carry water from the well. Just tell me what you want, and I'll make it happen." Clara looked around the cabin, at the cook stove she had scrubbed and seasoned until it gleamed, at the curtains she had mended with thread that didn't quite match, at the table where they ate their meals in silence that had grown comfortable instead of cold. "I want a bigger kitchen," she said. "And a porch swing." Caleb blinked. "That's it." "That's enough." He stared at her. The hat stopped moving in his hands. "You could have anything. A house like the one my father built. Servants. Fine furniture shipped from back east. Everything a woman could—" "I didn't come here for a house," Clara said. "I came here for a life. The words hung between them. Caleb set his hat on the table, sat down across from her, wrapped his hands around the coffee cup without drinking. "I don't understand you," he said quietly. "I know. Every woman I ever met, they wanted things, houses, jewelry, land. They looked at me and saw what I could give them." He shook his head. "You look at me, and I don't know what you see." Clara considered this. She thought about the train platform, the crooked letters on butcher paper, the silent wagon ride through the dust. She thought about the daguerreotype hidden under the floorboard, the wildflowers in the tin cup, the ledger filled with names of people who needed help. "I see a man who leaves flour on a widow's doorstep and rides away before she can thank him," she said. "I see a man who checks fence lines that aren't his and carries water to stock that don't belong to him. I see someone who's been carrying a weight so long he forgot what it felt like to set it down." Caleb's hands tightened around the cup. "That's what I see," Clara said. "Not the land, not the money, just you." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a meadowlark called. The sound drifted through the open window, high and clear. Caleb opened his mouth to speak. A knock at the door cut him off. Silas Tucker stood on the porch, a wooden box tucked under his arm. His face carried the satisfied look of a man who had completed a difficult task. "Morning," he said. "Got something for you." He held out the box. Clara took it. The wood was plain, unvarnished, but the hinges were brass and the lid fit snug. "What is it? Open it and see." Clara lifted the lid. Inside, nested in folds of dark velvet, lay a cameo brooch, cream-colored profile against a coral background. Set in a frame of tarnished silver, the face in the carving was a woman's classical features. Hair swept up, expression serene. Clara's hands began to shake. She knew this brooch. She had watched her mother pin it to her collar every Sunday morning. She had traced the carved profile with her fingertip as a child. Fascinated by the smoothness of the stone, she had held it in her palm the day she walked into the pawn shop on Chestnut Street. Trading the last piece of her old life for $12 and a train ticket west. "How?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "How did you—" Tucker glanced at Caleb. Caleb was looking at his boots. "He wrote to Philadelphia before you even got on the train." Tucker said, "Had me send inquiries to every pawn shop in the city. Took some doing to track it down. The man who bought it didn't want to sell." He shrugged. "We convinced him." Clara stared at the brooch, at Caleb, at the box in her trembling hands. "Before I got on the train," she repeated slowly. "Before you ever met me." Caleb still would not look at her. "I read your letter," he said. "The one you sent with your photograph. You wrote about your father, about the fire, about selling everything you had to start over." He cleared his throat. "You mentioned the brooch, said it was the hardest thing you ever did. Letting it go." Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. "So you sent for it." "I figured if you were willing to give up the last thing you had for a chance at something new, then you were the kind of person worth taking a chance on." Tucker shifted his weight. "I'll leave you two to it." He tipped his hat and walked back to his horse. Clara stood in the doorway, the box in her hands, the brooch gleaming against the velvet. Caleb remained at the table, his coffee untouched, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. "You believed in me," she said, "before we ever met, before you knew anything about me except words on a page. I reckon I did. Then why the test? Why the cabin and the worn clothes and the whole town thinking you were poor? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I've been wrong before. Because believing in someone from a letter isn't the same as knowing them. Because I needed to see. He stopped, started again. I needed to know you were real, that you meant what you said. Clara crossed to the table, set the box down, lifted the brooch from its velvet bed. I'm real, she said, and I'm staying, not because of the land or the money or any of that. Because this, she gestured at the cabin, at the window, at the view of mountains and grassland and sky. This is the first place that's felt like home since my father died. She pinned the brooch to her collar. The silver was cool against her throat. Caleb stood, reached out. His fingers brushed the edge of the brooch, then moved to cup her face. I ain't good at this, he said. Talking, trusting, any of it. I know. I'll probably make mistakes. Say the wrong thing. Pull back when I should lean in. I know that too. But I want to try. His thumb traced her cheekbone. If you'll let me. Clara covered his hand with hers. I'll let you, she said. That evening, they sat on the porch in the new rocking chairs. Caleb had built them while she was in town, pine frames, hemp rope seats, the wood sanded smooth and rubbed with oil until it gleamed. They creaked softly as they rocked, a gentle rhythm like breathing. The sun dropped toward the mountains. The sky turned gold, then rose, then deep purple. The first stars appeared above the eastern ridge. Clara wore her mother's brooch. The silver caught the last light, glowing warm against her collar. Down the valley, a sound drifted through the evening air, faint, wavering, the notes of a harmonica played by unpracticed hands. The Henderson boy, she thought, learning a new song. Folks'll talk different now, Caleb said, now that they know. Let them talk. Clara's rocking chair creaked as she settled deeper into the seat. I know who you are. Do you? She looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, softened now in the fading light, at the hands that had built these chairs for her, at the eyes that had finally stopped watching and started seeing. I do, she said. The harmonica music faded. The stars multiplied. The lamp burned in the window behind them, casting a warm rectangle of light across the porch boards. What do you want? Clara asked. Not what you think you should want. Not what your father wanted or what people expect. What do you really want? Caleb was quiet for a long time. His rocker stilled. He looked out at the valley, at his land, his responsibility, his inheritance, and then back at her. This, he said, right here. Reckon that's all I ever wanted. Clara's hand found his on the armrest. His fingers closed around hers. They sat together as the night settled over the valley. Two figures on a porch, a lamp burning behind them, the mountains rising dark against the stars. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. A weight, perhaps, or a tenderness we did not expect. The image of two people on a porch, holding hands as the stars come out, the sound of a harmonica somewhere down the valley. These things settle into us and do not ask to be explained. Many of us know what it is to be tested without knowing it. Some of us have stood in rooms where whispers followed us, carrying ourselves with whatever dignity we could gather. Perhaps you have loved someone who did not know how to say what they meant, or you have been that person yourself, holding back, watching, waiting for proof that it was safe to trust. These are not lessons. They are simply the shape of a life, familiar as breath, It is all right to let this story rest now. It does not need to teach us anything. It only needs to have been heard. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.